What's up, y'all? Welcome into episode 22 of Catch and Counter. As always, I got my guy Nibs with me, and then we got Dakota in here, third week in a row. But we're gonna do something a little different this week. Kind of a slow week in boxing, and we'll at the end of the show we'll get into the fights that we got coming up. But me and Nibs' favorite segment, Fantasy Fight Friday. It's back. It's making its triumphant return, back and better than ever before. So Nibs, we went back and forth. We each picked one matchup. I know the matchup that Nibs picked is Evander Holyfield against Alexander Usyk. So Nibs, I'll first let you set the stage to that one and kind of get us going, kind of set the parameters, the weight class, and all those kind of things for us on that one, my guy.
Muted, my boy, muted.
Hey, look, play this fuck up. What's happening, fellas? You know what I mean? Thanks for being back with us, Dakota. You know what I mean? Me and Jack on Catch and Counter, baby. The authority in all things boxing. Hey, look. I picked this fight, and I picked it at cruiserweight, not heavyweight. I think that when you look at it, right, Usyk won his cruiserweight title. I think it was the WBO, 10 fights in to his career. Evander won his at 12 fights. These dudes at the time that they were cruiserweights, and the cruiserweight division doesn't get a lot of love. But I think if you look at their careers, I mean, yeah, they're both Hall of Famers at the heavyweight division already, right? But if you look at the section of their careers where they spent at cruiserweight, I think that's when they were the most dynamic. I think that's where they were the best at their peak and primes. If you take Evander Holyfield, he was unbeatable at cruiserweight, right? You couldn't pick a flaw on Evander Holyfield at cruiserweight. He dominated. You could say the same thing about Usyk. I mean, he was in there, there was really nobody that had anything for him. Even the people later on in his career before he made the jump to heavyweight, dudes were dodging him, right? He gets to heavyweight, and then what does he do? He unifies belts. I mean, you know what I mean? Same thing Evander did. They have very similar paths as far as how their careers have played out. I mean, Usyk still has plenty of time left on his career. We don't know what he'll end up doing at heavyweight. But if you just look at what their contribution was to the cruiserweight division, right? If you were to have both of those guys in the cruiserweight division at the same time, we'd be talking about the cruiserweight division more than we would the heavyweight division. If you take those two guys just alone and put them in the division at the same time, there are people who are at light heavyweight and even some of the smaller guys at heavyweight who are trying to get down to fight them because it's just big time. You know what I mean? So for me, my heart wants to pick Evander Holyfield because I grew up with the dude. But I'm going to tell you this. I think Usyk wins a split decision 12 in a all-time classic fight. Like, they give us one of these fights people are talking about 100 years from now. You know what I mean? So that's my pick. I take Usyk in a split decision for all the marbles, and both of them get knocked down at least 3 times. That's where I'm at. What do you guys think?
I mean, it's probably the two greatest cruiserweights to ever do it, right? I mean, like you said, it's the two kind of stars of the division. I can't, because it was a little before my time, I can't speak to Holyfield's opposition in his cruiserweight reign. But in retrospect, when you look at the guys that Usyk fought, guys like, Michael Hunter, Tony Bellew, I'm looking at his box art right now, Murat Gassiev and Myris Britis, all these guys were actually really good fighters. That maybe weren't the biggest names, but if you were watching the division at the time, these were not soft touches. These were the very best of his era. And he cleaned it out, right? He literally had to clean the division out before he moved up to heavyweight because there wasn't anything interesting for him. And there also wasn't anybody that was really going to give him a hard time. Even the guys he had already beaten that gave him a hard time, it just felt like he'd have done them worse the second time. So I've always, I know old heads, they can't take the fact that maybe one of the newer guys would win a fight or whatever, but I have to agree. I've always thought Usyk was the greatest cruiserweight to ever do it. I think he would have beaten Holyfield, but I don't think it would have been easy. I just think he would have been a little too sharp.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You guys made two good picks. And then Felix, we want to hear what you think about this. And everybody in the chat listening, who would you guys take prime for prime Evander Holyfield against Alexander Usyk? So, great picks, great explanations. But I think I'm gonna be a man on an island on this one. I got to take the real deal, Evander Holyfield, in this one, and I'll explain why. The feat of Usyk, I think, is an interesting one, and I love the matchup. That I mean, obviously, I mean, if Nibs picks the matchup, we know it's going to be a good matchup. I mean, come on now. But because Usyk is an old school fighter, he's one of those guys that has the gas tank to go 15 rounds. He's stronger as the fight goes on, so I think it's a perfect kind of style matchup. But for me, I just see even I look at like the Breeders' fight with Usyk. So he won that fight, but I think that fight was very, very competitive, and I think Holyfield's a better version of that. I think he can kind of close the distance and kind of rough up Usyk a bit on the inside. And then the one, I don't even want to say flaw, but just the one question mark about Usyk sometimes is that body. You can dig him down to that body in the amateurs and in the pros. You can kind of hurt him a bit. So I think Evander would kind of work those hooks into the body, close the distance enough. I do think that Usyk's a hell of a fighter, and even if he goes down from a body shot, I guarantee you he's gonna get up. So I don't see either man getting stopped in this one. But I gotta go with Felix, and then my guy Jeff from Bourbon and Boxing. I got Evander Holyfield in a close fight, but I think unanimous decision for Holyfield in the end.
And you can't go wrong with that, right? Like I was on the fence, bro. Like and part of me feels bad for not picking Holyfield. Like, and I know I'm gonna get raked over the coals for picking Usyk, but I think Evander Holyfield is probably the best fighter you want in a war type fight, right? Like if it's a slugfest, you want to pick Evander Holyfield because win, lose, or draw, he's gonna give you some shit, right? He's going to be entertaining as fuck. Even if he gets knocked down, he's getting back up. It doesn't matter. You're going to have to either kill him or somebody else is going to have to stop the fight. If he can get up on his 2 feet, he's throwing punches. I just think that Usyk can take enough of his punishment, right, to make it to 12 rounds. And if it goes 12, I give the nod to Usyk. If it's a war and somebody gets stopped, I mean, it's Evander all day. You know what I mean? But I think Usyk gets just enough to get through the 12th round, and you got to give the nod to Usyk at that point.
I also don't think Holyfield ever fought anybody with that kind of footwork, so it would have presented a different challenge. There was a little bit more of an ego style at the time where we're going to stand and bang for the crowd and to show who's tougher and whatever. And Usyk just wouldn't have ever given him any of those opportunities. I'm sure he would have gone and gotten some of them, but I just think that Usyk would have had too many tools in his tool bag.
Yeah. And the feet was the number one thing when I looked at it, that I thought would give Evander some issues. I do think he's athletic enough, and probably considering who else Usyk fought, he fought great fighters, but I think Evander at cruiserweight would have been the best athlete that Usyk would have been in the ring with too. So Usyk would have had the feet to give Evander some issues, but Evander would have had the athleticism to close the gap, maybe better than any of those guys. And Usyk's the kind of guy that, I mean, it's hard to outwork him too. Like I said, even the second AJ fight, when AJ starts kind of working the body a bit, getting some momentum, Usyk 10, 11, 12 kind of pulls away a little bit. So it ain't easy to outwork a guy like Alexander Usyk. But if there's one dude at cruiserweight all time that would have the ability to outwork him and outdog him and kind of wear him down, I think the Holyfield will be that guy. But I mean, that's why we do these kind of matchups, though, because we do them for a reason, because you can argue one side versus the other side. And at the end of the day, ain't any of us wrong with whoever we pick.
Right, and before we move on from this one, too, I just want to say, and I know cruiserweight's a little slower than it's been in a long time, but this kid, Jai Opataya, is something really special. And there's a handful of exciting guys right now, and I don't think any of them are touching him. So he may be the kind of the third head of the greatest cruiserweights of all time, Mount Rushmore, before it's all said and done. I think that's a possibility.
And I agree with you, but I think the cruiserweight division is grossly underrated, bro. Like, you know what I mean? I know a lot of people think Jake Paul could come in here and win a cruiserweight belt just because he's Jake Paul and he can knock people out, right? I'm here to tell you, you pick any of them top 10 in the cruiserweight division, they're smoking that boy like, a stogie. It's not going to be nice. But people look at it as kind of like the redheaded stepchild of boxing, right? Like, who are these guys? They're not quite heavyweights. They're not the superstars at 175. They're just kind of, right? Well, there was a time, in that Evander Holyfield's day where the cruiserweights were some of the best athletes, in boxing, right? Before 175 kind of took over, as a little bit, Roy Jones came along, and it made it a much more competitive, division than it was before. 175 used to be that. The cruiserweights used to be the most athletic dudes in boxing, right? Because they weren't quite heavyweights. Most of these dudes looked like they could go play in the NFL, tomorrow. You know what I mean? I mean, you look at Evander Holyfield right now. If I woke up looking like Evander Holyfield at 60 some years old, I think I could whoop somebody's ass right now. You know what I'm talking about? So, and sometimes I think he does. He needs to go sit down. But you take guys like that, you put them in a ring, super athletic, and then the fact that they can punch holes through a brick wall. I mean, give me that shit all day. You know what I mean? I just think that Usyk is just enough a better of a boxer overall. If he can make it 12, he wins, right? You know what I mean? In my opinion, that's the way I look at it. But again, it's one of those fights where even at cruiserweight, whether it's cruiserweight or heavyweight, if that fight happens, there'd be a million people lining around the block to go watch it because it's going to give you everything you want.
That's a fact. And I want to bring up one point that you just mentioned too, because it's a good point. Even just talking about the cruiserweight division as a whole now. You said like Evander Holyfield back then, all those guys looked like they could have played in the NFL. And I think because of we've seen boxing kind of exit the mainstream media, part of the reason the cruiserweight division, especially here, is underrated because we don't have any American cruiserweights really. Michael Hunter was a good one, but he's now up at heavyweight. I mean, Jake Paul, we don't really want to get into that, considering him a legit cruiserweight because he already lost to Tommy Fury. So been there, done that on that one. But a lot of it is because a lot of those athletes are in the NFL now, or they are in the NBA now. So a guy like Evander Holyfield,
Well,
with
they
as
are.
athletic, and as athletic as a guy like Evander Holyfield is, he probably is playing linebacker in the NFL nowadays if he was there, just because there's not as many opportunities for boxing. You see guys like Myles Garrett or guys like LeBron James like that. If those guys were boxers and had trained their whole life for boxing, we'd have a lot of great cruiserweight and heavyweights from America. So I think that's part of what it is also, just how boxing's left the mainstream. It's hurt, especially the bigger divisions, because those guys can go make millions of dollars in the NFL and the NBA.
And just to back your point up, there are no Americans in the top 10 of the cruiserweight division at cruiserweight on BoxRec right now. So that just seconds what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, right, even up until Deontay Wilder came along, we didn't even have anybody. There's been a resurgence of U.S. heavyweights. You know what I mean? Before Deontay Wilder, I mean, we had nobody for like years, right, as the top in the heavyweight division. Like the big boys just weren't being represented well in the U.S. at all. It was all the smaller weights, welterweight, junior middleweight. I think that was like our cap was like super middleweight, right? And then everything below that. Now you've gotten guys that have kind of made the transition into boxing or just choosing boxing who are a little bit heavier in their stars. But even it used to be boxing was one of the top three sports. It's just not anymore. So I think if we can get back to that, we get some of these dudes. How many college athletes make it to the NFL, right? There's only 32 teams, right? You take some of those guys, put them in a boxing ring, put some gloves on him. World-class athlete, put some gloves on him. Who knows what can happen? I mean, look at Deontay Wilder. He didn't start fighting until he was a grown-ass man. So I think if we get our shit together in the U.S., we can actually, I think it's our own fault. I think we are responsible for this because we tell these guys it's either NFL or bust or NBA or bust. There are other options out there. Look at all these other countries. They're doing it. Why aren't we?
Well, and this is a little bit of a deeper conversation, right? But in certain countries, their amateur programs are invested into more by their governments. And so the fighters and the coaches are able to get access to funding and facilities that fighters in our amateur program, which is very much the Wild West, often can't get access to.
It's a sad day.
Those are some good points. So now, yeah, 100%. But that was a good conversation there. So we'll move on to fantasy fight number 2. Dakota, I'll let you kind of set the stage for this one, but we got Eric Morales and Juan Manuel Marquez. So kind of set the stage, weight class, and any kind of background information you want to give on this one.
So just to give a little middle ground, I say we make the fight at 130, right? Because they both had success at 122 and 126. They both had some success at lightweight, but 130 is a nice middle ground where I think they were both kind of at their best. If I'm not mistaken, the last Barrera and Morales fight was at 130. If I'm not correct, though, comment. This fight was always in my mind the greatest fight that never got made, and that's part of why I wanted to pick it as a fantasy fight, because it was a fight that actually could have and probably should have happened, right? I mean, it's two absolute icons of Mexican boxing that were in the same weight neighborhood for the majority of their careers. I think they had their peaks at different times, right? Like Morales was a huge star as a young fighter, knocking everybody out. Marquez was sort of underappreciated. He didn't really get the mainstream fans' attention until, the fights with Pacquiao. So I think their careers had different trajectories, even though they were a similar age and of the same era. But God, what a great fucking fight it would have been. I think for me, it's always a little difficult to choose against Marquez in that kind of fight, just because if someone's really aggressive, those are the kinds of guys that open themselves up to his counterpunching. But Morales had length and boxing ability that a lot of guys didn't have. So it would be an incredibly difficult matchup to pick on any given night. I also, for example, thought Barrera beat Marquez. I didn't think that was the best decision. It was a 1 or 2 point fight either way, but I think I would lean towards Marquez. But man, this was one that I always wanted to see. I never understood how this one slipped through the cracks.
Nibs, I'll let you give your take on this one. So Marquez and Morales at 130.
Two of the best. It is what it is, right? And at featherweight, this is one of those sign me the fuck up fights, right? Like period. And Dakota hit it on the head. This is one of those fights we all wanted, never got to see, right? And it made sense to make it. Like, are you serious? Like, why are we not getting this fight? And it just didn't happen. I am a huge Morales fan. I have a shit ton of respect for Marquez. I think he split those Pacquiao fights. I don't give a fuck what half of these people were watching. I think he won more of the fights than Pacquiao did, and I know the numbers say different, but even with that being said, at 130, I'm taking Morales. I think that at 130, I mean, between him, Marquez, and Barrera, you could pretty much flip a coin. Like, it was, you know what I mean? Like, even when they fought each other, or some combination of it, it was like flip a coin, and one of those guys is going to win. Put your money on him. You probably won't go wrong. You know what I'm saying? But I guarantee you're going to love the fight. That it's one of those fights where it gives me Gotti Ward kind of like Gotti Ward 2 kind of vibes. Like, this is gonna be some shit, right? I'm picking Morales, and I'm picking him by stoppage in the 10th. That's where I'm going.
That's wild, bro. So, did Marquez ever get stopped? I don't think he did, right? Maybe early in his career. Well, and listen, to add to what you were saying too, and then Jack, I'm going to let you hop in, but I think the windows of opportunity to make the fight were kind of small, because once Marquez had the first Pacquiao fight, it was like, because I did a little research, right? He wound up losing to Chris John at featherweight in 2006. So by the time we got to 2006, I believe Pacquiao and Morales were having their rematch. And so following that, Morales went on a little losing streak, retires for a while. Maybe by the time he comes back and has a classic with Maidana, him and Marquez would have been a great fight, but it felt like the peak opportunity to do it had sort of come and gone. So I think really between 03 and 06, '05, they could have made it happen. But I actually think the window of opportunity for them to make that fight at its best was smaller than I remembered it being.
Yeah, so it's a
I
hell of
want to say, right after. Uh, I would say right after Jesus Chavez, right before Carlos Hernandez. Like I want to say right around there, like right before Morales fought Barrera. You know what I'm saying? I think that to me, that's what I went when I would have wanted to see it the most. But I think you're right. I think the best time or the easiest time for them to make it would have been later on when they were both at welterweight. But for me, like at the height, because I think Morales had all the belts at the time, if I'm not mistaken, or was either him or Barrera. One of them two had all the belts at the time. But at that time, I think like right before Morales fought Barrera, that would have been the best time to have that fight, right? And then winner gets Barrera, like you know what I mean? Like to me, that would have been like, yo,
Yeah, so it's a hell of a fight. So Dakota said it's at 130, so that kind of fits my answer because I had an answer for the lower weights and I had an answer for the higher weights. We're at 130, prime for prime. I think we're gonna have our first sweep. I am taking El Terrible Morales in this fight. I think that it's a hell of a fight. I do think his style does play into Marquez's hands, but I think that would be more up at the higher weights, which also wouldn't be really the prime for either guy. But Marquez, I think, filled into those higher weights a little better than Morales did. But at 130, like Dakota said, I think Morales has just enough boxing ability and enough to avoid a big knockout type punch. Where I mean, let's be real, both these dudes, there's going to be action in this fight. Both these dudes are going to get hurt. They're both going to bite down. But I think the activity, length, and a little bit of boxing that Morales can mix in there. He didn't do it enough maybe at times, but he still had a little bit of it. So I think that that would be enough for him to win this fight at 130. I think 135 and above is a little tougher for Morales. I just think Marquez filled out at those weights better, 40 and 47. Now, we don't have to get into whether that was naturally Marquez filled out or not. We'll save that for another day maybe. But at the end of the day, I do pick Morales at 130 at those low weights. But it's a hell of a fight. I'll say like majority decision maybe. So like one judge sees it a draw, the other two see it like 8-4, 7-5 kind of fight where Marquez has his moments. He does land some good counter shots, but I think the activity of El Terrible is enough to sneak out a decision in the end.
yeah, I'm with you at welterweight. Is Marquez at 130 though? At 130, I'm taking. I can't go against El Terrible at 130, bro. Like it would go against everything in my soul. But I get what Dakota's saying. I know Marquez ain't been knocked out, but he never fought Morales at 130 either. I'm just saying.
It's such a classic, bro. To me, that goes in the same conversation as Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe, as Sergey Kovalev and Adonis Stevenson, all of the great fights that never happened. This one to me kind of slides right into the mix. It really would have been a classic.
Yeah, I mean, even okay. Let's say after Barrera, he beats Pacquiao the first time, right? This is the first of the trilogy. Right before he loses that bullshit to Zahir Rahim, right? Slide that in there instead of fighting Rahim after he beats Pacquiao. You know what I mean? That would have been a good, like anywhere in that time frame, right? You know what I'm saying? Like either right before or right after, either right before Barrera or right after Pacquiao. That would have been the pin. I mean,
remember, the timing would have been so perfect because again, Marquez lost to Chris John at featherweight after all those guys had moved up to 130. So the way things timed out, it never quite came together.
But could you imagine, bro? Like if you were Morales, right? You fight Marco Antonio, Carlos Hernandez, Marco Antonio Barrera, Manny Pacquiao, and then Marquez back to back like that. You go ahead and make his bus for the Hall of Fame immediately after that. And the fucked up thing is, all the guys that these dudes have fought are Hall of Famers. Like, you know what I mean? Like, let's be clear. They're Hall of Famers. So at the end of the day, I don't care where the fight happens. But at 130, I think Morales wins. At welterweight, I think I mean, it's hard to pick against Marquez at 47 and Morales because you see Morales just didn't carry the weight. Like at welterweight, Morales was just kind of getting his checks at that point. I think.
Yeah, that's why for me the clear line in the sand was 135. So I thought 135 and up, 135 and 40 would favor Marquez. Obviously 47 definitely would have too, but 30 and down would take Morales. And I see what Felix is saying. This is part of why I did favor Morales. And now I still think it's a competitive fight, but I didn't think we saw the best of Marquez until he kind of moved up more in weight too. So I think that we're saying prime for prime, but prime for prime at those weights, I do think it does favor Morales. And I do, because I was looking a bit as you guys were talking, but I do see the timeline you guys were talking where this fight could have happened. So Morales beat Pacquiao in March of 2005. And then Marquez beat Victor Polo in May of 2005, right? The fight before he lost to Chris John and before Morales fought Zaire Rahim. So that could have been the time that later that summer, those two guys could have fought each other. Instead, they both lose. Then they eventually both move up. The rest is history, and they don't match up. But that time in 2005 would have been the time to have those guys meet up with each other for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I know Felix is saying it wouldn't have been a classic. I think it would have, because at that time Morales was one of if not he was pound for pound guy. You know what I mean? Marquez wasn't quite pound for pound, but he's circling the wagons. You know what I'm saying?
I think him not being pound for pound was less who he was as a fighter. I mean, he definitely got better, but I think he just didn't have the same kind of exposure.
Yeah. But and here's the thing, right? Again, you see where his career ended up going. You know what I mean? And that's why I think at 147, I think he beats Morales. Felix makes a good point here. Maybe at 140, it's an even more of a classic fight. I think really at 135, anywhere like 135, 140, at the weights. But I think that time frame, like I said, that 2004 to 2008 ish time frame, like if that had happened anywhere in there, I'm good with it.
There we
I
go.
still take
Perfect. Mhm. There we go. So we had a clean sweep on that one. I'll be interested to see what your guys' answers are for this one. So this is one I had to think about, and I think it was Sean Porter on his podcast. Someone talked about, they were asking him about the similarities between him and Maidana, and if Porter could have given Floyd Mayweather a fight similar to that stylistic wise. So kind of overlapped each other, but never really met up with each other in the welterweight division. I know Maidana, rightfully so, after those two Floyd paydays, kind of checked out. And hey, who can blame him at that point? He had already been in a lot of big fights. He still had time left in his career, but hey, bro, you get two Floyd paychecks like that. God bless you. Go enjoy the rest of your life, and that's exactly what he did. But we got Showtime Sean Porter against Marcos Maidana. We picked three fights that would definitely be action fights. I'm sure this one would be the same kind of way. It's an interesting one because the first thing they thought about, they were comparing Porter style to Maidana style. And I think they are similar in ways, but I think they're also not there difference in ways also. So for me, I would actually favor Sean Porter in this fight. I would take him to win. I just think he has a little bit more dimensions to his style. They're both looked at as kind of the come forward aggressive guys, but Sean also had the ability to box on his toes. He didn't use it as much, but he definitely had that. When he knew a guy wanted him to come at him, he would kind of box on his toes a bit, like he did with Ugas or Danny Garcia and some of those other fights too. So I think he would do bang just enough, and Maidana would certainly get his too. But I think Porter using his toes a bit and kind of using it as athleticism, because he's always been a very, very underrated athlete. Sean Porter was too. He's a former, I think he had Division I scholarships to play football too, so he was a great athlete. And I think his feet would have been the difference in this one. Maidana's a great fighter. I don't think the foot speed would have been enough to keep up with Sean Porter, so I do have Sean Porter winning this fight by decision. But that's not to say that Maidana's not going to have his moments in there too. So a very, very competitive fight. The athleticism and the boxing of Sean Porter, to me, makes a difference in this one, though.
It's a tough call because, like you said, there is some similarities, but I also saw Sean as more of like a Ricky Hatton type, like a make body contact with you and kind of pin you on the ropes, whereas Maidana really did need a little bit of distance to get his power. I think I'd have to lean towards Maidana just because he was such an explosive, destructive puncher that I think in a close quarters fight like that, I just think that, and it's possible that Sean just would have been able to smother him and bully him around. But I think when they got mixing it up on the inside at some point, the power discrepancy would come out. But man, that's another one, right? That if the timing had aligned just right. I mean, unfortunately Porter was still a prospect by the time he was having the Mayweather fights. But man, that would have been a hell of a fight.
I'm taking Sean Porter all day, twice on Sunday.
I
And
can't blame you. It's a tough matchup to think of.
yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, and again, I don't know, but maybe I'm biased or not because I'm a fan of Sean Porter's. But I'll tell you this though, I watched that Marcus Maidana fight where he caught that body shot from Amir Khan and got back up. Look, I had to stand up and salute the boy because I said nobody comes back from those. Like nobody. I don't give a fuck who you are. You catch one of them liver shots that way, it's a wrap. The fact that he stood up, I was like, okay. So much respect to Maidana, and for what he did in the first Floyd fight, he made it uncomfortable a lot longer than most people thought it would be. But I just think Sean Porter has more tools in his bag, and he's been in with the better opposition at welterweight. Yeah, Maidana fought Floyd twice, but we saw what happened in that second fight, right? I think Maidana has one style that he does very, very well. I think Sean Porter can adjust and fight several different ways, and I think he just picks Maidana apart in the later rounds, right? I think he'll take like 4 or 5 rounds maybe to figure him out, and then it's he puts on a clinic. I think, in my opinion, I don't think it's close. I think it's like 8-4 Porter.
A good point that
Go ahead, Jack.
I was gonna say a good point that you brought up that I didn't think of too is that I was looking at the athleticism of Sean, but also on the inside. I mean, Porter would have been the bigger, stronger guy. He fought at like 165 and then 156 in the amateur, so he was coming down as a 54-pounder, moving down to 47. Where Maidana filled out pretty good at welterweight, but he was still a 40-pounder who eventually moved up too. So as much as I'm thinking Porter had the tools and the athleticism. On the inside, punch for punch, Maidana was stronger, but you brought up a good point of Sean maybe kind of being physical and roughing him up and smothering Maidana. They always say that against the puncher, you either want to be all the way out or all the way in. So I think Porter could kind of toe the line of that, being outside, making a miss, but then also smothering, working good on the inside and not getting hit clean by Maidana's big shots on the inside either. So I think that was a good point you brought up also.
The only thing I would say too, that I think would play into Maidana's favor is really the only guys he ever lost to were very technical boxers. If anybody gave him a window of opportunity to let his hands go, he basically beat them. And I think that as much as Sean's probably better technically, he'd give Maidana those opportunities. And I just think Maidana had a not generational power, but he was one of the best punchers of his era.
I think that you're not wrong. Like, Adrian Broner found that out the hard way, right? And I think that Sean Porter is an upgrade from Adrian Broner, right? At 147.
Yep.
So I think even if Sean Porter he'll stand there enough with you to give you some highlights, right? But he's not stupid. He's not going to just, okay, I'm just going to stand here and wing punches with you because it's the macho thing to do. I'm going to, wing punches with you for a little bit to make it entertaining, but I'm going to also box the shit out of you enough to win these rounds and get out of here with a dub. I think, and I think that, again, just athletically, I think he has the advantage on Maidana, and I think that's what carries him through the 12 rounds. And I don't think Maidana, although, you never know, it only takes one punch, and Maidana's got one punch knockout power. He really does, legitimate knockout power. I don't think at 147 he had enough of it to stop Sean Porter. I mean, we've seen Sean Porter in there with some dogs. You know what I mean? He gave Errol Spence everything he could handle and a lot of people say that was close, real close. You know what I mean? So, if he's been in there with some dogs and he's taken, I mean, it took Terrence Crawford 10 rounds to put him down, and we all see what Terrence is doing. You know what I'm talking about? So I think he's athletic, and he gave Terrence Crawford everything he could handle for 10 rounds. So, we're talking about one of the best guys in the division right now, or the guy in the division. So I just think Porter's got enough athletic ability, and he's got enough of that dog in him, but he's also got enough of that boxing skill to say, okay, I'm gonna piece you up a little bit, and then we get in here and tussle, and then I'm gonna back out. You know what I mean? So, but I think Maidana, again, and this is not a detriment to him, he's really good at his one style, right? Like he's probably one of the best come forward guys we've had in recent history with
And
a
more
chin.
awkward. And more awkward. I think Sean did
Right.
things a little bit more how you would want to teach a fighter to do them, which is why I think Maidana gave somebody like Mayweather a little bit more difficulty because it was just so untraditional in his approach.
Yeah, and I even look at Sean's fight with Keith Thurman for an example of names, as you were saying, too, of him being able to be in it. That was a hell of a fight, a really close fight, too, and he took bombs from Keith Thurman in his prime at that point, too. Another example of it. And I think Maidana's good, but I don't think he's the level of Keith Thurman, especially Keith at that time. But there was also a time that this fight could have been made, too. So we all know, clearly, it's already been mentioned, but when Maidana had the big win over Adrian Broner, that was December 14th of 2013. Actually, 1 week before that was when Sean Porter first became a world champion. He had the unanimous decision win over Devin Alexander.
Oh, was
So
that
not that, yeah, and not that that fight was being talked about at that time, because clearly after that fight, Maidana had wanted the Mayweather fight, and those were the last two fights that he had. But there was a little time in there where business sense it might not have made the most sense for Maidana, but where Porter had just beaten the guy that he had lost to, so there could have been a storyline there, and that fight actually could have been made at some point in 2013 or 2014. But that probably wasn't the best version of Sean Porter yet either, where Sean has said that he learned a lot, especially from the Kell Brook fight, and we saw him develop himself as a much better fighter after that. He leaned a little more on his boxing, he didn't just kind of rush in as he did earlier. So I think for the best version of both guys, it would have been a few years after that for Porter when Maidana was already out of there.
Man, you talk about a guy who fell off a cliff as far as talent goes. It's Devin Alexander. My goodness, I just wanted to that shit hit me hard. I remember people were talking about he was one of the next guys, and
dude, do you remember how tremendous he was against Maidana? I mean, that was a classic performance. The two biggest ones for me were always Devin Alexander and Joel Julio. I don't know if you remember.
oh my god, yeah, the love child.
Bro, Joel Julio's lost. I'm not doing a bit. Joel Julio's lost probably 15 to 20 fights in a row, is an active jobber right now. And it's always sad when you see somebody that had such high hopes that and listen, there's jobbers that go the distance with guys. I don't call those guys punching bags. The guys that get stopped every fight are punching bags, unfortunately. And I think Joel Julio's become a bit of a punching bag in his 40s.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of the small Gabe Rosado kind of guy, right? Where it's like Gabe Rosado was never, touted as, hey, the big name in the division. But he was always a guy that hung around. He was always going to give you good work. You know what I mean? But you could stop him. He's a career gatekeeper kind of guy, right? That's kind of what Joel Julio ended up being, which is crazy when you think about where he started.
I think it's even worse though, bro, because Rosado was a main event, maybe $1 million fighter, whereas Julio, I think, is just taking fights to take fights and is not. I can't speak to his winning motivation, but I never felt like Rosado was just showing up.
It's kind of not, but kind of the same kind of area where you could put a Hank Lundy kind of guy into, right? He's
perfect. Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's just taking them to get his money. And it's sad because you saw where he was going to go one day. And then, but I'm telling you, Devin Alexander, bro, like I used to sit up here and say, yo, this dude, he could be one of the greats. Timothy Bradley kind of exposed him. But then he came back and, he beats Matisse. He beats Maidana. You think he's going to get back on the roll. After the Sean Porter fight, it was just, it was never again. But yeah, I mean, I said all that to say Sean Porter was
Definitely a good fight. The thing is, I think all these fights would be hell of a fight. So real quick before we move on, I guess we might be biased to each of our picks, but I'm actually not going to. But if we had to pick one fight out of these three to be the fight of the night, let's say these were all in the same card, which one would you guys pick to be the fight of the night? It's a hell of a question, but it's going to lead to a hell of an answer. And for me, I would probably have to take, they're all good takes. I think Holyfield and Usyk would be the highest. Can't even say highest level. I mean, they're all high level fights, but Morales and Marquez would probably be my pick for the fight of the night. If those 3 fights were all on the same card. But I mean, talk about an answer where you can't go wrong with any of them. But I'll pass it to whoever wants it next. A fight of the night. It's almost damn near an impossible question, but if y'all had to pick one, which one would it be?
I'll be honest, I would actually take Holyfield and Usyk because I think it is for real the two best to ever be in the weight class. So as much as Morales and Marquez are all-time legends, there's way more to pick from in the 126 to 135 batch of talent. So for me, Holyfield and Usyk would be sort of you can't have that not be a main event fight.
As a fan, I'm fucking with boxing and bourbon. Like, it's Marquez and Morales. Like, bro, I don't care where you put that fight on. You know what I'm saying? You put that shit in my backyard. You know what I mean? There's the whole city showing up to watch that shit. You know what I'm talking about? My fucking HOA is gonna hate me. But you're right. I mean, when you're talking about the GOATs in the division, it's literally 1A, 1B when you're talking about Holyfield and Usyk, right? But then I think the sleeper would be Porter and Maidana, right? Because it has all the potential. What was the Tim Bradley? I keep forgetting that guy's name. Provodnikov, is that what the fuck his name was? Sean Porter Maidana has that kind of vibe where you don't think on paper this is going to be a good fight. And then the next thing you know, it ends up being the best shit I've ever seen in my life. You know what I mean? Seeing a dude throw punches literally out cold on his feet and still fighting back. Like, it was one of the best things I've ever seen. Made me a Tim Bradley fan. But Sean Porter Maidana gives you that kind of vibe. Like, that could end up being something like that. So Jack, really, you fucking with my emotions right now, Smokey. That's what you're doing. Because really, if you put all three of these fights on a card, you could charge whatever the hell you wanted to, and people were paying it, bro. At the end of the day, I know that's kind of a cop out, but I'm not picking.
It's all good. We got our guy Bean saying Holyfield Usyk would be like Holyfield and Tony. So we got love for James Toney in that one, but that's all right. So I guess he's saying that he would take Usyk in that fight. He says Usyk would just be too sharp. Kind of some of the things that you guys were saying on that one, but either way, like you guys said, if we could have seen any of these fights, if there's a way to get a simulation, anything like that, I'd love to see these fights play out. Unfortunately, that is not realistic, but that's why we have these fantasy fights. We set these things up to kind of talk about them because these fights, even though these fights ain't happening in the ring, it's still cool to talk about the X's and O's and how we think these fights would play out because we had 3 great fights. We're going to kind of continue this segment going forward a bit, especially these next few weeks where we don't have a ton of fights, but we're going to now move on to the next segment now. Turki Al-Sheikh is kind of taken over boxing, I guess, in Saudi. He's almost being able to kind of pick and choose whatever fights he wants to make in the sport. So we're all now going to kind of put our promoter hat on and be Turki Al-Sheikh and pick 3 fights that we would want to see in the sport of boxing. So 2 of them will be championship fights, whether it's between a champion and a contender or 2 champions, however you want to do it. And the third fight will be a fight between 2 contenders. So they just they can't hold a world title at the moment right now. So I guess we'll go one by one in case we have the same answer from one of them, that we can kind of go from one another. But Dakota, I'll pass it to you first. What are one of the championship level fights that if you were in Turki Al-Sheikh's position that you would look to make for this year, 2024?
Well, there's so many that we want that we aren't getting, right? But if I'm like the boss man of boxing right now, my instinct is telling me to make David Benavidez and David Morrell, right? Because they are sort of and I don't even, or actually there would be a title on the line. David's a champion. To me, that's the 2 ultimate boogeymen of the sport. I think it's 2 of the utmost killers that we have available in our game today. And it's 2 guys that we want to say are pound for pound guys, whether it be Canelo, Bivol. We want to see those guys against those guys. And I think whoever emerges from a matchup of those 2, there's sort of an undeniable force in the sport because I think at the moment they both loom as the future.
Yeah, hell, that's a fight I'd love to see. And I have those 2 guys, but in separate fights, so we'll kind of get to that in a little bit. But shoot, if we could get that fight, I know that would be near the top of my list too. But Nibs, I'll pass it to you next. one title fight, if you were in Turkey Al Ashik's position that you could make this year, what's one of the two title fights that you got for us?
It to me, it just makes the most sense, right? Canelo Benavidez, bro. Like, I mean, it just makes fucking sense. Like, cut it out, right? Like, let's cut out all the bullshit. Let's cut out all the, I don't want to fight Mexicans anymore. Let's cut out the, I'm making this much, I'm making that much, bro. Canelo Benavidez. It's so obvious, it's painful, literally, painfully obvious. This is the fight that should be fucking made. Cut it out. Give it to us, goddamn it. It's like Usyk in Fury, right? It was like, yo, stop fighting all these other dudes. Fight each other. Get this over with. And they finally did. Thank you. You know what I mean? That's it. It's almost like they're spitting in our face, not making this fight. Like that's how I feel about it, bro. At this point, it's like cut it out. Cut it out.
And by the way, I couldn't agree more. That's like the biggest no brainer of a fight as far as the promotion to me as a boxing match. Right at this moment, Royal and Benavidez is just such a like. I don't even know where I'd go with that as far as who I'd pick.
I think to be honest with you, if you gave me Morel versus Benavidez or Canelo, right? Like, I mean, but yeah, Morel and Benavidez, because they are the younger set, right? Canelo's kind of in his own atmosphere now, and we have to admit that it is what it is, right? He's put himself in Mayweather air, where he can kind of just do what he wants, and we can all be mad about it, but we can't really complain. You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna complain, but we're gonna watch his fights anyway. It doesn't matter. David Morrell Benavidez, you're right. I mean, that's a great fight. But come on, bro. If it's so fucking obvious, just do it. Just do it. Get it over with. Come on.
So I'll piggyback off of Nibs because that was one of the fights that I had too was Canelo and Benavidez. So I see what Weedy's saying also about at 75 he doesn't see Benavidez coming back down to 68, but we're looking at it more in a hypothetical sense. Like if we were in control of boxing, if everybody had a clean slate right now, what are the fights that we would make? And Canelo Benavidez is the fight for me too. Now we've seen this story before. We have a young Mexican American superstar, even if he's not as this David's not as big a superstar as this guy was against the older guy in his 30s, got a lot of wear and tear on his body, but still being maybe the face of Mexican boxing. We've seen that before in Oscar De La Hoya and Julio Cesar Chavez. And I think this fight would be the new version of that fight, this era's version of that fight. And I think just the importance for the sport is why I would make this fight too. Just it means so much to see. We haven't seen as much. We're starting to get back to it, but of the older lion kind of passing the torch to the younger lion. Now, hey, maybe they pass the torch and maybe they hold on to that torch for a little bit longer. We saw that with Floyd and Canelo. Floyd wasn't ready to pass up that torch yet to Canelo, so he held on to it for a little bit longer. But that's the fight that I would make. Just I think for the mainstream media, it would be huge, and I think for Canelo to give a guy like Benavidez a shot, I think that's order of business. That would be the first one I'd want to make, but the next one I have would actually be my number one option. So this is probably the first fight I would make, but not my number one fight just yet. But it's a hell of a fight, and I would definitely be looking to make this one. And I hope that it's looking like we might not, but I'm still going to hold out faith and be optimistic that we still do get Canelo and Benavidez at some point, even if it's not looking likely at the moment.
And I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but it's just so obvious, right? Like, you know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's a fucking softball. You know what I mean? And it's just floating out there, waiting for somebody to smash the shit over the fucking fence. As a fan, because as a super fan of boxing, right? The only other fight really I can even think of as champions would be Tank and Shakur. I'd love to see that because I want to see that shit get cleared up. Like, why are you not fighting each other? You know, like it's just like before Devin moved up. Why are you guys not fighting? Like, you claim to be the best, cut it out. Let's get some clarity. All these other divisions are starting to get clarity now, right? The other guys are fighting each other. That would be, to me, as a fan, yes, I want to see the obvious stop it, make this fucking happen. But Tank and Shakur to me is another one of those ones where it's like, okay, and I know Shakur had a stinker of a fight, his last one out, but let's be real, he's getting up for Tank, right? They would both get up for this fight, so that would be my other kind of wild card in there.
Here we go. So before we move on now, if we had to make picks for our fights that we have, so Bean saying he thinks Canelo makes easy work of Benavidez. So I don't think, to me, I don't think either guy makes easy work, but I do think Benavidez being the younger, stronger, more active guy too, just as far as punch output, I think he'd be able to kind of wear Canelo down. So I would pick Benavidez over Canelo in that fight. So Dakota, and when you give your pick, if you had a pick for it, I know Benavidez, Morrell's kind of a 50-50 or Nibs with your two fights. If you guys wanted to pick winners for those fights real quick, or even just maybe not winners, but the guy that you think would be the favorite maybe in that fight per se. No.
In Benavidez versus Morrell, that's truly a 50-50. You flip a coin wherever it lands, I'll take your word for it. I think when it comes to him and Canelo at the moment, I have to lean Benavidez because he's making top level opposition like Boo Boo Andrade and Caleb Plant just look like they're not at his level, which Canelo was also doing a few years ago. But as he gets a little bit older, it's not like his skills are eroding. He's just not as much of a freak of nature as he was a couple of years ago. So right at this present moment, it's hard to pick against Benavidez, I think.
I'll say this, bro. I'm not picking against Morrell. Period. Right? Like it, and I don't care who he's fighting. Until somebody like just on the eyeball test alone, yeah, him, that guy, all my chips. And I could be wrong, right? He could prove me wrong someday. Maybe he gets in there with Canelo and it's too much for him. I don't know. I think he picks Benavidez apart, and I think he stops him. And I'm saying that as a fan of Benavidez. Like, give me Benavidez against anybody not named Canelo or Morrell. I'm picking him every day. There's no second thought. He's beating that guy, right? To me, Morrell against anybody, I'm taking that. I'll leave the pick for Canelo and Benavidez to you, Jack. But me personally, I'm taking Tank over anybody at that division. I think as technical as Shakur is, he just hasn't faced anybody like Tank, bro. I mean, Tank's a whole nother level of, the dude can box, and I mean, when you can literally hit somebody so hard where they can't see and their eyes not shut, they just can't see. He hit me so hard, I'm blind right now. My eyes are open, I just can't see shit. Get that man his check, bro. It's a wrap, bro. That's the way I would see it.
Similar to what you just said about Tank is what I think makes David Morrell so special. And I've mentioned this before, but because he can bang, and we've seen him get these huge one-punch knockouts. But what separates him is just his boxing ability. People forget that he comes from that Cuban school of boxing. If David Morrell had no power, he would stick on the edge and he would do all the Cuban movements. He's got great legs and he would be able to box. So that's what I think makes him so special. Is he has the ability to make fights entertaining, but he also has the pure boxing ability to kind of get on, maybe not even get on his bike, but get on his toes and kind of make a guy miss and outpoint him that way. So that's what makes him so special to me. But Dakota, do you have one more championship fight before we move on? Then I'll give my championship fight and then we can go on to the contender matchups after that.
Well, I mean, I have many of them, but I think that one championship fight that I would be extremely interested in seeing right at this moment is Joe Parker and Frank Sanchez. Now, I know we've talked about wanting to see Joe Parker and Joshua. I think that's the fight he deserves, but goddamn does Frank Sanchez deserve a big fight. And it seems like Joe Parker at the moment is the only one who has a hands-free enough of a business life where he can just sort of make interesting fights and there isn't too many holdups. So that is potentially a fight that I think we could actually see that would be very significant in the heavyweight division and would create, I think, undoubtedly another star in the heavyweight division. So that's another championship fight that I would really love to see at some point.
I would like that too, especially if Fury and Usyk fight for undisputed and some of those titles start to vacate a bit. I would love to see that fight for the WBO title because Joseph Parker is now the interim champion, but For my last fight, this would be my number one choice of a fight that I could make in boxing. And we've seen, like I said before, too, just the passing of the torch moments of the young, up and coming guy against the man of the division, and to me, the man of the sport. We got Terence Bud Crawford, the undisputed welterweight champion of the world. And if I was in Turkey Al Sheikh's position, I would throw any money I possibly could to get him in the ring with Jerome Boots Ennis at 147 to defend his undisputed title. I mean, that's just, to me, that's just boxing at the highest level. I think Boots, we talk about the eye test with Morrell and these guys, he passed the eye test with flying colors. The only thing we want to see is we want to see him in with the guys. And no better guy to put him in with than the guy in the sport, Mr. Terence Bud Crawford. So the fight, I said that Canelo Benavidez kind of reminded me of Chavez de la Hoya. This fight kind of reminds me a bit of my guy Marvelous Marvin Hagler against John Mugabe. Mugabe was undefeated. He was an up-and-comer guy. He had a bunch of big knockouts, and he was the threat. Even though he lost that fight, he pushed Hagler a lot, pushed him enough that Sugar Ray Leonard sitting ringside noticed, okay, Hagler might just have taken enough punishment where I can take this fight at that moment. And I think even if Boots Ennis is to lose that fight, because Terence does have the experience, I think he's going to put on a hell of a fight regardless. I do think Terence's counter-punching would be something that he hasn't seen before. But Boots is young, he's strong, he can punch, he can box, he's got a hell of a jab out of both stances. His dad's a great coach too, so man, if I had one fight that I could make, I love Canelo Benavidez, I love all these other fights, but Terence Crawford and Boots Ennis is just something else, man. I think the fight between Errol and Terence was a great event. Maybe it wasn't the fight that we thought it could turn out to be, but I think that Terence and Boots could be that fight that we wanted to see.
If I could just add on to that real quick, Devin Haney's expressed interest in moving up to welterweight in the not-so-distant future, and I think that Devin Haney and Boots Ennis would have the potential to be one of the most exciting fights in boxing as well. And I hope that's one that we might get to see in the next couple of years.
Yeah, no, that's an unbelievable fight. And going back, because this was one I thought about too, what Jeff mentioned too, is Devin Haney against Teofimo Lopez. Teofimo's kind of been up and down. I think the style matchup I never thought would have favored Teofimo, especially not now. But I think if we're looking for a fight to make, I think it's still a pretty big fight. I think Teofimo is still a champion, and for me, that was a fight that I think Devin would like. I always thought I favored Devin in that fight, but I think that that's a fight that Devin could really look really good. It would be a big build-up. You got history with those guys. The dads would kind of build the fight up, so if you're promoting a show and making a fight, I think that's definitely not a bad option to throw in the mix either.
I'd like to see Navarrete and Foster fight. I think I would love to see that fight, bro. Before Navarrete moves up, I think he's gonna move up. But I think him and Foster fighting, bro. That's another one of those fights where I'd watch it no matter where they put it on, bro. And I agree with all your shit, like, you know what I mean. And then the other obvious pick, which we're actually getting, so I'm not even going to mention. Never mind. But I think you guys know what I'm talking about. But Foster and Navarrete, bro, I think that would be just a dope ass fight.
That's a great one too, and especially because Navarrete, I think he is going to move up. He's going to fight Dennis Berinchik for the vacant WBO title at 135. But like we're saying, if you were running boxing, if you had the bag Turkey Al Sheikh had, I'm sure you could throw enough change around to get Navarrete to stay his ass on 130 for one more fight who can get that Shock Foster fight too. So that's what's fun with these. We can kind of play fantasy game a little bit and talk about if we had the bag to make these fights. Yeah, Benavidez is moving up in weight, but if we got the bag to get him the Canelo fight right now, he would stay there. Terence is looking up to maybe fight Eubank. If we got him a big enough bag, we could make that Boots Ennis fight happen. So that's why I think this is a cool exercise to kind of make to talk about these fights, even if they don't happen, ones that we would want to see.
And by the way, David's got a serious fight coming up. I know everyone's bummed out that it's not Canelo, but he has a very, very serious fight ahead of him.
I'm gonna tell you something right now. I do think he's going to stay at 175. I do think he's past the Canelo thing because they've been trying for so fucking long. You know, I think he's exhausted by that. But Jack is 100% right, bro. If somebody came in and said, "Yo, look, I give you $50 million up front to fight Canelo and some back end," look, he be in that gym hard as a motherfucker trying to get down to 168, baby. I'm gonna tell you right now, he be in the best shape of his motherfucking life. Somebody throw that kind of money at him.
Yeah, so now we can move on to the contender fights. Well, I'll give two for this one because Dakota did kind of throw in a little caveat, which is a good one. So he kind of caught me on this one. One of these is kind of cheating because there is a secondary title on the line, which would technically be a title fight. Because I know he threw in the Parker Sanchez fight because it is technically a title fight. But The first one I have is David Morrell against Christian and Billy. I think that because it would set up if Canelo and Benavidez is on that same card, the winner of Morrell and Billy could then fight the winner of Canelo and Benavidez in a perfect world. If we're throwing bags around, I think we could make it happen. Morrell and Billy, I think both guys are. I think Morrell's got just the boxing ability, but I mean, talk about a fight that would be entertaining too. Nibs and Billy's our guy. We know he's all action too, so he's gonna bring the fight. Morrell's gonna bring the fight, kind of box a little bit too, but I think that would be the fight I'd love to see. Technically a title fight though, so I'm not sure exactly where that would fit in the mix, but I'll throw one also in the mix just for two up and coming guys for a contender fight in. Man, if we could get, they've been talking a bit back and forth, I know, but Keyshawn Davis and Floyd Schofield, Kid Austin, I think that would be a fantastic fight to make at 135, and I think first of all, the loser of that fight is still a contender, but the winner of that fight would truly arrive, and I think would be ready for a title fight next if that fight were to happen. So, Nibs, your contender fight. If you had to pick between two contenders, what is a fight that you would like to choose, and why would you choose that fight?
All right, so I know these guys are one weight class off of each other, but Xander Zayas, Elijah Garcia, I'd love to see that fight. I'd love to see it, and I'd love to see it at 154 or 160. I don't know if Elijah can get down to 154. I think Xander can get up to 160 easy. I'd love to, like, to me, that would be the next fight, right? Like, if you could almost make up a title fight for that and I'd be okay with it. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? But I think style-wise, like if you look at both of those guys and what they do, you put them in a fight together, I think it works, bro. That's just me. Plus, I think you could immediately put the winner in a title fight immediately, and then you could take the loser and put them in an elimination fight right after. Like I think it would work out great for both parties at the end of the day. Plus, you know, it's just two young bulls, bro. I know again, Elijah's up at 160 and Xander's at 154. I don't know, you know, how that would work out, but I think because of them being close enough, yeah, I'd love to see that, bro.
Yeah, and one thing I'll throw in for that fight is, first of all, we got the Saudi bag, so I'm sure we can figure out the weight and we'll be able to make that thing work. But also, when me and Dakota were in the building for Foster and Nova, Xander was there. He was doing, I think, the international commentary, and I got to meet him really quick and stand next to him, but he's going to be at 160. I'll just say that eventually. I mean, he's in great shape. He's a professional, so I think he's going to stay at 54 for as long as he can, but he ain't a small dude at 54, so I think he will be coming up to 60, especially if we got the money behind it. He'll definitely be a middleweight, and especially it's a perfect fight because the middleweight division is looking for kind of that young star. That fight would, I think, develop exactly the star that we're looking for. But Dakota, you can kind of give thoughts on that fight if you want a little bit too, and then you can give us your kind of contender matchup that you would make.
Well, the first thing I want to say too is it's amazing once you start playing this game, what a low percentage of meaningful matchups there are outside of the occasional super fight that we get. Right, we once in a while we get an Usyk Fury, we get a Bivol and a Better Biv, but anybody that's ranked 3 through 15, it's so rare that we get to see these guys in the ring, and I think it really hurts the sport if 20 guys are competing to get the same one fight. It just holds the sport up as opposed to fighting each other to earn that position. Everyone's waiting in line, sort of trying to make their argument for why they deserve it, as opposed to doing it with these, you know what I mean? I think the one that I would make personally, and I thought about this a lot, like contender fights, what excites me, and this is a random one, but I think that Virgil Ortiz and Jesus Ramos would be a tremendous matchup at 154. I think, especially with not really knowing where Virg is at as far as his health after having issues at making weight at welterweight. You know, and I know Jesus lost the decision to Lubin. I don't think that's going to have any effect or impact on his career whatsoever. If anything, it's going to make him better because he's going to realize that, yeah, he probably did get ripped off, but he did take his foot off the gas. There's a ton of lessons in there. I just think it's guys that are at two very similar positions in their career and both have the potential to be, in my opinion, pound for pound type talent. So that's a contender fight I would love to see.
Yeah, I definitely love that fight. A fight I even thought about for a title fight was a fight between Virgil and Tim Tszyu. We even got here Jesus Ramos and Fundora. I think that's a great matchup too. So I think any of those matchups, and I see what Weedy's saying that he thinks Virgil, which is what me and Nibs had said when we mentioned the Zoo fight, when they mentioned it too, is that we probably want maybe another fight or two in between, but I think if we get Virgil at 100%, I've always been high on Virgil Ortiz. I thought that he's just with the strong jab he has and his aggressive style, and the way he sits in that high guard too, he's tightening up his defense. That when I like all these matchups, when Jesus Ramos and Virgil Ortiz would definitely be one hell of a fight. Those two, Virgil and Zoo, Ramos and Zoo, throw Fandora in the mix. I think those would all be great fights. We got Bean saying Bivol and Benavidez. So I think that we got a hell of a lot of fights, and
That
that's
could
the thing
very
that you
well
mentioned. There's a lot more fights out there than you realize once you kind of start going down the line too.
that Bivol Benavidez fight could very well happen because the winner of Benavidez and Vosdick, I believe, becomes the mandatory for the winner of Bivol and Beterbiev. So everyone's talking about David's not going back down. Listen, I think David might have the opportunity to fight for the undisputed light heavyweight championship in the next year. So I don't know why he would turn that down for anybody.
No, it's a fact. So this, yep, Nibs, you can go if you got one last comment for sure.
Yeah, I was just gonna say Daniel Dubois and Jared Anderson. I don't know why it's been kind of floating around in my head, and I don't know what the reality of a fight like that would look like. But I said this, 2 fights ago when Jared looked kind of weak. You know what I mean? Again, when he fought a guy who was a world champion and a guy who wasn't just going to go away, I felt like he needed more work. I think Daniel Dubois kind of would be the perfect fight for him right now, to prove if he can be a world champion, right? I kind of feel like Jared Anderson's in that he's kind of in the twilight zone of his heavyweight career, and he needs somebody to pull him out of there. And I think a Daniel Dubois type fight, one, I think it would be a great, entertaining fight. You know what I mean? But it would show us what Jared Anderson really, really is. I mean, and I have them. I think I got Jared ranked 7th. I got Daniel ranked 10th in my heavyweight rankings. So they're close enough in the rankings where it would actually be a super legit fight. That's just one more that I kind of wanted to throw in.
Yeah, I'm happy you threw that in because shit, I love that fight too. I think for both guys, I think Dubois kind of really revived his career since the Joyce fight. Talk about a guy just like Joseph Parker a bit too. Just he stayed active. He's got some big wins after that. Even the Usyk fight, he learned from that fight. I mean, he might have been an inch or two away from being heavyweight champion of the world that night too. So he's definitely got the experience over Jared Anderson, but that is a fight I'd love to see to kind of see where Jared stacks up because I think he's got all the talent in the world, probably even more God-gifted talent than a Dubois, and just he's a little more nimble. He fights more kind of like a smaller guy than a guy like Dubois, who's big and strong but kind of robotic at times. But shoot, that's definitely a fight that I would love to see. And hey, if we get that on the card, because that's a fight that I think is a real possible fight too. We've thrown kind of some fights that we'd love to see that might not be the most likely ones, but I think that's one that we without a doubt could see at some point later this year or next year at some point.
And Dubois was a hero for a lot of us, getting rid of the other big baby punk ass. Like, you know what I mean? So now he can fight the real big baby. You know what I mean? So, I think just on that alone, he should get another big money fight.
Okay, we got a great one right here too. This is one I thought about also. It's a fight I've always wanted to see, but Keyshawn Davis and Raymond Morataya. I think that's a fight that I hope that we see at some point. So I think that that's one that kind of like the Keyshawn and Kid Austin fight that I said. They're all kind of in that similar spot. So any of those like guys that can mix it up. I've always been really high on Danger Morataya too. So don't count him, but I'm sure Keyshawn will be the favorite in that fight. But I want y'all to know that do not count Raymond Morataya out in that fight or against any of these dudes at 135 because that dude is going to be a tough out for whoever he gets in the ring, no matter who you are.
I kind of wanted to go back to Dakota's point about David Benavidez's next opponent. I was looking dude up, right, while we were talking, bro, because I'll be honest with you, I don't know shit about the guy.
Mm-hmm.
David might be in some trouble, bro.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm not
people are acting like they found some random Ukrainian guy. This guy is the guy that put Adonis Stevenson in a coma that gave Beterbiev the only competitive fight of his career.
He was beating Beterbiev most of that fight too. Yeah,
this guy's a serious threat. He retired for a couple of years and now he's had his comeback. He's looked really good. Like I think it's only because of the disappointment that they're not getting Canelo, but
Hmm.
this is actually a great matchup.
Yeah, this I be honest with you, like I thought Plant had a chance to outbox Benavidez to get a dub. I'm much more convinced. Like just watching the highlights, bro. I've been watching the highlights on mute in the background here, and I'm like, this dude could legit beat Benavidez. I'm still
Hmm.
picking David to win this fight. You know what I mean? Because I'm a fan. But I'm gonna tell you, if this dude is real, like if these, you know what I mean? Like if this shit is just not, yo, man.
He's from the
Hey,
Lomachenko camp. He was on the same
Hmm.
Ukraine team as Lomachenko and Usyk. He's in that same class of guys.
Yeah. And I believe too what kind of got him back in the sport was he was Canelo's sparring partner for the B-Ball fight and some other camps. So I think that's kind of he was kind of sparring a little bit and he's like, hold on a second, I know I lost to Beterbiev, but I still got something left in the tank a bit too. So I think that stylistic wise, that's a great matchup. To see Benavidez against part of the reason he was able to wear down Plant and Andred was just the size of him being bigger, stronger. So him being the guy moving up in weight, fighting a real light heavyweight in Vosnik is interesting also size wise as he can. If he could still bully a guy like Vosnik, but it won't be as easy as was Plant or a guy in Andre who moved up multiple divisions.
and I mean, I'm never gonna bet against Benavidez. After I've seen him in the last couple of fights, like what he did to Demetrius Andrade, like he hurt my feelings with what he did to Boo Boo. You know what I'm saying? But I'm gonna tell you, David Benavidez is the truth. I'm not, there's no denying that, right? But looking at this dude's highlights, bro, and I know they're highlights, so but I'm telling you, he is dangerous. You know what I'm talking about? So, hey, I think Dakota might be on to something, bro. Um, yeah, I don't know, man. I like it. I want to see, and I know we. Nah, never mind. I'll let it rest. I'll throw that one for another day.
I was gonna say we can do another segment of this coming up, so we can definitely save that one for the next
I
one.
mean, we
But
could go all day, right? We could go all day on
no,
fantasy sports.
exactly. No, that's a fact. So we'll get into now. Just we do have some fights. We're just gonna briefly go over them, just the schedule for this upcoming weekend. So we do have a main event on the zone, a Golden Boy card. Kid Austin's Floyd Schofield, who I mentioned in a fight that I'd like to see, is the co-main event of this card. But William Zepeda and Maxi Hughes is the main event. I believe it's an IBF title eliminator. So it's good to see Maxi Hughes get a fight like this off of the Kambosos fight, where I think basically anybody who watched that fight believes Maxi Hughes did win that fight. William Zepeda is one of the most entertaining guys in boxing. Throws a shit ton of punches. It'll be interesting to see how he deals with a tricky guy like Maxi Hughes. I gotta think the activity and just the size and strength of Zepeda is too much for him. But it's definitely a good matchup. But it's kind of flying under the radar, but it's got a lot of implications at 135 too. And I think that the winner of this fight should be in a title fight next, and that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, I mean it's an IBF and WBA light heavyweight eliminator. Yeah, go ahead, Dakota. You saying?
I mean, I think that we're talking about Hughes and Zepeda, correct? Yeah, I mean, I think that this is actually a really tricky matchup for Zepeda in terms of style matchup because I can't remember him having to fight a guy that has the kind of footwork and IQ that Maxi has. If Hughes had gotten the decision he deserves against Kambosos, I think people are really viewing this as a 50-50 fight, but just the optics of having that L on your record, I think is deterring people, and he doesn't have a lot of knockouts, but I really like Zepeda, but I feel like the matchmaking he's gotten has been advantageous to his style, which I think is a little bit limited. But if he beats a guy like Maxi Hughes, I think it shows some layers to his game that maybe he hasn't been able to show yet. Just because when you're fighting guys like Jojo Diaz that are going to stand in front of you and don't have that kind of mobility, yeah, you can throw combinations. You know what I'm saying? With Tanahara, he was just way stronger. He was able to track him down. I actually think that Maxi could really give him problems. Even if he doesn't beat him up, he may just be able to outthink him and win a boxing match. So I think it's a better matchup than people are giving it credit.
Yeah, it's the kind of fight where I feel like we're gonna find out right away what kind of fight we're gonna get. Because if we see in the first round Zepeda's already, even if he's not landing much, if we see that he's backing Maxi Hughes up against the ropes and he's kind of really controlling the action, I think that will say a lot. But if we see Maxi Hughes kind of being in the center ring, kind of playing the matador to the bull and Zepeda, I think that could see that the longer he's able to do that, the more confidence he gets, the more anxious kind of Zepeda gets, to more mistakes he maybe makes, the more Maxi Hughes makes him pay. So I think the early rounds will say a lot, because the quieter early rounds will definitely favor Maxi Hughes. And if Zepeda gets going early, he's the kind of guy that once he gets going, you're not going to really kind of get him out of his rhythm. So I think you've got to kind of break that early on in the fight. But I think it's going to be hard for him to do that. I just think that Zepeda's volume, size, and activity is probably going to be too much for Maxi. And we got Jeff thinking the same thing. He thinks that the same thing I'm saying. That I think Maxi's tricky, so I think Maxi might last a little longer than that. But I do just think that Zepeda's size and just the activity, just all those punches he throws, and that Maxi's a good athlete, but it's going to be hard to kind of make. Even if you make Zepeda miss on 3 punches, he might throw 2 more after that and land those 2. So it's going to be kind of hard to offset a guy with constant offense like that.
I just think the way that Maxi doesn't allow you to set your feet is what's going to be difficult for Zepeda. So just the fact that he can kind of keep you on the move and keep your angles changing, I think that you're going to be surprised how long it takes for Zepeda to feel like he can let his hands go.
Well, Zepeda wins this fight, but I want to touch on what you guys talked about earlier, right? Maxi Hughes has probably the biggest argument for a robbery in a fight in the last 10 years that I've seen with my own 2 eyes, bro. Like, he should have checked his pockets after the Kambosos fight, because that was, you talk about a robbery, bro. And on the strength of that alone, I think Maxi Hughes makes this fight interesting, right? I don't think he wins, and I do think he gets stopped maybe late, 10, 11 is what I'm thinking, because I think he'll be tricky enough, right? He'll give him some stuff to look at, and he's nobody's bitch. He's not going to just lay down and know what the assignment is, right? Oh, I'm here just to get a check. He's not that guy. He's going to show up and do his best to try to win, but and I think Zepeda is on his way, right? He's that guy for me, that he's on his way. I think he's doing it the right way. But I tell you what, man, I watched that Maxi Hughes and Kambosos fight 3 times after watching it live, just to see if I was missing some shit. Like, I was like, there's no way anybody else.
It's like a Lara Williams type.
Bro, I mean, it might have been worse. it might have been worse. Like, it was so obvious he won that fight. I felt bad for the guy, and it goes to another point, right? You see these guys with these losses on their record. You got to investigate some of them L's, bro.
And the one good thing is that, it does suck for Maxi because Kambosos is now fighting for a title against Lomachenko and he's not. But I do want to give, boxing isn't always fair to these guys, but I do like the fact that Maxi off a loss is still on an eliminator. So it shows the IBF and WBA are saying, yeah, he might have an L on his record, but we know he didn't really lose that fight, so he is getting the opportunity for that too. So salute to H Money in the building, salute to all you guys in the building. We appreciate all y'all that have been kind of with the comments and stuff. You guys are helping the show flow. And we got one more thing we want to talk about before we wrap up. So Dakota's boy, Joe Joyce, is making his return this week to the ring. So obviously he's coming off the 2 devastating losses to Zhilei Zhang. So Dakota, it's your guy, so we got to pitch it to you first. He's a big favorite in this fight, so we do expect him to win this fight. But what do you think is the career path for Joe Joyce at this point? Does he look to make another run at a title, or does he kind of more just become an opponent for guys? Because he's an older guy. You're taking the punishment. We thought his chin was granted at one point. It's kind of been cracked a bit. Where do you think he kind of goes from here? What place does he kind of find himself in the heavyweight division?
Well, first of all, who is he fighting? Do you know who he's fighting?
Cash Ali.
Okay, I don't think I know Cash Ali, but I think what I'm looking for from Joe Joyce, it's tough when you got fighters in this kind of position, right? And I think the best comparison I can give is Jarrett Hurd, where the reason Jarrett Hurd was beating guys that were way more skilled than him was just the durability and an engine thing. And then once the Lara fight happened, and that was followed by the loss to J-Rock, he went back, he tried to retool his boxing skills and whatever, and he comes back, and technically it looks like he's worked on some things, but the thing that made him special isn't there anymore. I think that's always the concern with Joe Joyce, right? I never thought his success would come because he was going to be the most skilled guy. That was never going to be the case. But it felt like, based on multiple fights leading up to the Zhang fight, that his engine was just going to be a little bit too much for most guys at heavyweight. I think he took a lot of punishment in the Parker fight, which led to, Zhang being one of the biggest punchers in boxing, being able to land clean. And I think you saw that threshold just sort of snap in Joe Joyce. And I think the question now is, what is left? And if you're not going to be the guy whose engine is just too much for everybody, who are you as a fighter? And I don't think for a guy like him, I think it's too late in the game to go back and try to completely retool your skill set. You got to be who you are. It's just a matter of how much of that is left. And at this point, I don't really know.
To me, it's the Deontay Wilder conversation. There are so many holes in your game, but you have one thing that you do way better than everybody else, right? Joe Joyce had one thing he did way better than everybody else he was fighting. He could come forward, and like you said, he had a granite chin.
He just kind of outlast you, He just sort of outlast you.
It's the same thing with Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder could be losing a fight 11 and a half rounds, right? But his right hand is so devastating, it doesn't matter. You're going to watch those 11 and a half rounds waiting for that right hand. And then it hits 90% of the time, right? And then it finally doesn't. Then what do? Right? It finally didn't. And then, look, I'm going to throw the Fury fights out the window because those are classics, right? We except for the second one. You gave us two classic fights with Fury. Great. You lost against probably one of the best in our division all time. He's arguably the best right now. Then you get Joseph Parker, a guy you should beat, and you didn't even whiff him. You know what I mean? The one weapon you do have, you never dropped it on him. I think Joe Joyce is we'll find out, right? We'll find out when he fights this cat. The Cash Ali guy, I don't really know. He looks like he's a bum with a decent record. So I expect him to get past that. But then what happens when you get back into the mix with some of these top 15, top 10 guys, right? Are you going to go back to being the Joe Joyce we know and love? And that one trick comes back, right? Or are all the holes we keep telling you going to just, fill up your bucket and you're going to sink, bro? And I think that Deontay Wilder is drowning right now because of that. And I think Joe Joyce is going to be in a similar boat. No pun intended, bro.
Well, and by the way, I think one of the things that was really tough to watch about the second Zhang fight was like watching him be hesitant to hold to let his hands go, watching him keep his hands in his pocket, trying to jab and be technical. It's like, bro, that was for your pro debut where you're trying stuff out. Now you got to really just be yourself and let it hang out. And if you get knocked out again, you get knocked out again. I think that's what happens when you have guys like this that rely on durability, on their engine, on their ability to take punishment. If it's Jarrett Hurd, if it's Joe Joyce, if it's Juan Diaz, whoever it is, they all just hit that wall. And it's a matter of, once you hit that wall, do you have another thing you can go to? Sometimes they do. A lot of times they don't.
That's one of my worries with Joe Joyce. I'm rooting for the guy. I've been a big fan of his too. How can you not like a guy like that when the style he had and just the wins he was able to have against the Parker fight? And Weedy brings up a good point. And this is why you can't always play the game of the triangle theory, because Zhang was able to beat Joyce and Joyce was able to beat Parker, but Parker's mobility gave Zhang problems and clearly was able to beat him. So you see how that triangle effect don't always work. But for Joe Joyce, it is interesting just because he is 38 years old now, and he is what he is at this point. Kind of the same thing with Deontay Wilder. So hey, I ain't against putting those two in the ring with each other at this point. If you're looking, if it's hard to match those guys against other guys in the division, I ain't against having those two guys go in there, because besides that, it's hard to find guys that they could beat if those guys are at the point that they are in their careers right now. And I love both those dudes, especially Deontay. That's the dude who got me into boxing in general. Without him, I might not have even gotten into boxing. So
The ship has
we'll see how
sailed
they
on that.
go.
The ship has kind of sailed on that fight being interesting. I got to see both of them do something meaningful before that's a fight I really care about again. Especially, honestly, Deontay's last performance, a lot of it had to do with Parker, but man, he looked like he was counting his money before the bell rang. I really have no interest in seeing Wilder at this point.
I disagree. I think hats off to Joseph Parker. First off, especially in the Zhang fight, I thought he was. I thought it was over when he got knocked down the second time. I thought it was a wrap. Zhang lost that fight. Parker didn't win it. Let's be real clear. But you got to give credit to a guy who gets back up and goes back to his game plan. Like, he didn't abandon the game plan. He kept doing what he does. To Dakota's point, he didn't say, okay, now I've got to do something different to beat this guy who just knocked me down twice. I'm going to do what Joseph Parker does, right? And Joseph Parker doing what Joseph Parker does is the reason why he's won a majority of his fights. Yeah, you'll take some L's, especially in the heavyweight division, but do what you do, right? Joe Joyce has to do what Joe Joyce does, right? Because he mails his punches in. He's not going to beat anybody in speed. He's not even the most powerful puncher. He is a powerful puncher, but he doesn't have one punch devastating knockout power like a Zhang, like a Wilder, right? He'll get you with the accumulation of punches, and then he'll make you look stupid because he can take everything you're throwing at him. And now somebody cracked that chink in his chin, and now he's second guessing his biggest weapon because somebody beat him to it. Stop it. You know what I mean? Wilder just refusing to throw his right hand because he got his ass whipped, his previous two fights. Once you're no longer able to execute your biggest weapon at the heavyweight division, you might as well just go ahead and call your career what it is, bro. Again, I thought Wilder lost the fight to Joseph Parker. I didn't think necessarily Joseph Parker did anything that nobody else was doing before they fought Wilder, right? He was boxing the shit out of him. But what did Wilder usually do? He figured out a way to land his right hand. It didn't even look like he was looking to throw the right hand in the Parker fight. And again, I'm not saying Parker didn't earn that win versus Wilder and Zhang. He did. But look, you got a guy who just gave you the fight because he stopped fighting after he knocked you down the second time. And you got a guy who doesn't even look like he wants to be in the ring, like Dakota said, right? He's just there to get his check. So
that's what I'm saying. The idea that we would keep throwing Wilder in these fantasy matchups, or that promoters would toss out, hey, do you still want to see him in AJ? Like, I don't think that's a good precedent to set, that if you come out and you shit the bed and you don't let your hands go for 12 rounds, you still get a big fight just because you're a destructive puncher.
But I think a fight with him and Joe Joyce would be intriguing on the fact that, again, both of them have these huge holes, right? And they both got devastated, recently. You put them in there, the loser goes home and shuts it down. The winner, okay, let's see where you can go. Like, if Wilder finally gets back on his shit and you see him throwing the right hand like he was before earlier in his career, maybe he gets his confidence back. I don't know. Joe Joyce says, hey, you know what? I'm just going to keep doing what I was doing before the Zhang fight. Maybe we get a good fight. Who knows? But I think the winner of that fight could move on. The loser has to get out of there.
Especially because they both have the thing that can give the other guy problems, where Joyce has, which live Dakota, when we talked about this fight before, you liked Joyce against Wilder because just the pressure he gives, being so big and strong, and that he would kind of keep Deontay on the back foot. Now that we've seen Joyce's chin get cracked, we can say, well, the one thing that Wilder does have is that straight right hand, and Joyce ain't going to exactly kind of slip that and counter that big right hand either, so I think it would be an interesting style matchup. Going back to Joe Joyce, the one thing that does kind of worry me about him is that what you guys said is that the best thing he always did was he had that motor. And he was able to, maybe, yeah, you might kind of land some good shots early on, but you're not going to. He's going to take your best shot, and even if he's not a big one-punch guy, he lands a bunch of big clubbing shots, and he slowly, methodically breaks you down. I still think he has the ability to methodically break guys down. The question is does he have the ability to take the shots that he used to take? And that is my question, which I'm not sure he's able to do. Because just like I think Wilder can still knock guys out, he's going to be able to kind of find that shot and do it. with Joyce, I think he can still kind of break guys down, but does he have the ability to withstand the punishment? And that's just the problem I have with him going forward.
I also think Joyce needs to go back and watch his own fight with Daniel Dubois and watch how his assertive jab helped to dominate the fight. You know, when you're not gun shy, but you do it just a little bit more intelligently, it goes a long way. And I think those things were part of how he beat guys that clearly had more talent than he did.
I think this also brings up another point, and I say it all the time. You know, Jack kind of gets tired of me saying it, but you have to fall in love with the shit you're bad at, right? I say that all the time. Boxing, if there's a sport, if there's any sport, you have to do the shit before you get into the field of play or the ring or whatever that you're poor at. Boxing is it, bro. Like, you cannot just focus on the shit you do well and expect to have, you know, longevity in your career and be able to bounce back. I think it's a reason. There's a reason why Joseph Parker is able to continue fighting on after a devastating knockout or a loss, right? Because he's got a lot of tools in his bag. He can come back. He can get up. He's got a chin, right? I think a lot of people wrote Joseph Parker off, you know, after the Joe Joyce knockout. I think a lot of us, including myself, wrote Anthony Joshua off. I love what he's doing now, though. He's like, okay, yeah, I took some tough losses, but I'm coming back the right way. The Ngannou fight, I give it to you. You know, you get your money, but he's fighting guys and proving to people, hey, look, yeah, I took some L's, but don't get it twisted. I'm still one of the best out here, and I'm doing it this way. So I think, you know, you have to be multifaceted. You have to continue to, you know, have more things in, because what happens when that one thing that you're really, really good at doesn't work, right? And I think that's what Joe Joyce, the Joe Joyces of the world, the Zangs of the world, the Wilder of the world, they're finding out the hard way. I do these things really well, but what happens when it doesn't work, right? So I think Joe Joyce, if he comes back and completely annihilates this Cash Ali guy, which I think he will, he'll probably get in there with somebody who's top 15-ish, you know, and then we can see where he's really at. And I think this is just a let me get back into the swing of things, get my confidence back fight. I think that's all this really is. And I hope he does exactly what we expect him to do.
It'll definitely be interesting to see how it plays out, but slow week in boxing, but we kind of fit a lot of content in there. We kind of threw some extra things in there, but I kind of liked how the show went. We started with the fantasy fights and slowly moved on to the more realistic fights and kind of tied in this weekend's boxing. But we're in episode 22 now, so y'all that have been here already know. And if you're just showing up, you're about to find out how we end every single episode. I don't even have to say anything else. I'm going to just give the floor to Nibs because he does it a lot better than I do, so I'm going to just let him do it and stop talking. But Nibs, I don't even got to say anything, man. The floor is just yours, and you can do your thing and wrap this thing on up for us.
But you are going to have to unmute your mic to do so.
I said earlier, play us fuck up. Okay? First off, you know what I mean? But yes, hey, Jack, I appreciate you. Dakota, we appreciate you for coming on. As always, I like to give everybody their flowers. These two gentlemen above me here, that, you know, without them, you know, ITR wouldn't run. As with everybody else, you know, in the back, you know, Felix and Ray and everybody else. We love you guys. We love all our fans. Everybody in the comment section, thank you for coming out. But it's that time, man. Support local boxing. 3 very important words. Your man Jack up here, you know what I mean? He's got a box rec coming up. You know, he's going to be in there doing his thing. If you're in that area, the New England area, go catch him and his folks. You know what I mean? Dakota's always going to fights. He's at more fights than most boxers are. I got some information here. If you're in the Arizona or Phoenix area, tomorrow night in Phoenix at the Celebrity Theater, local card, Danny Barrios, Jesus Ibarra, Suavecito, Adrian Rodriguez, and more. They'll be up there, at the Phoenix Celebrity Theater. Come check them out. Lot of fights going on that card. If you don't know where it is, go check it. A box rec, Google, find it, right? Support local boxing. These dudes put their lives on the line for your entertainment. I can't say it enough, man. You watch football, you watch basketball, you watch baseball. That's cool. A lot of people, before they ever go to an NFL game, will go to a high school basketball game, will go to a high school football game. They'll go to, all the local events. The Little League World Series is probably one of the most watched, baseball events, not named the World Series, right? Uh, do the same for your boxers. These guys are out there. I guarantee you, there's a local card every week somewhere close in or around you. Go support them because they need it just as much as you do. And they're putting way more on the line. A lot of these guys got families. A lot of these guys just need to get out of the mud. And boxing, again, not just supports the fighters, supports your local economy. It helps everybody involved. So get out there and support. We appreciate you.
Yes, sir. Couldn't have said it any better. That's why I didn't say it. That's why I saved it for him. But a little note that I have too for local boxing is that my guy Thomas O'Toole, who I've gotten to know, he's actually having a fight. He's been fighting a lot in the New England area. Former Irish national champion, great amateur with a lot of international experience. He's actually having his first homecoming fight. So he is fighting in Ireland, in his hometown, tomorrow afternoon. So I know he's really excited for that. And Nims always mentions too is that a lot of these guys, first of all, you want to support the local guys because some of those guys are never going to make it big on TV. So it's good for them to get the ticket sales, the sponsorships, and all those things. It's huge because someone's going to put on these shows for the promoters and all those things. All these guys running around selling tickets, big to support. But also, a lot of these guys in these big fights, they all started somewhere. A guy like Thomas O'Toole, who's fighting tomorrow, he's already been on a matchup show. He's going to be on TV in the very near future. So it's good to kind of get an idea of these guys. I did a feature on him. If you're already on our channel, you can go back and see it. A little homecoming feature I did on him. It's cool to kind of see these guys before they get to the big show. So you already have some background on them and kind of get to know a little behind the scenes action. So that's it for episode 22. I'll give both you guys a chance real quick to shout out anything you guys have been doing. You guys do a lot of great work on other platforms and stuff too. So Dakota, if there's anything slip and weave related or anything else in New York area, anything you want to shout out, you can do that right now.
Well, a couple of things just to add to the support local boxing conversation. I went to a local card in Manhattan. It was about 2005, 2006. Me and my pops went. I was probably 13 years old. And it was a relatively high-level amateur show. And the ring announcer was just tremendous. I thought, how the fuck is this guy in here at this kind of fight, at this level? And his name was David Diamante. And now we see David Diamante at every major show on the zone, and he's really become one of the voices of boxing. So just when you go to high-level local shows, you never know who you're going to run into, man. You never know. You might see the future of boxing. You might see the future of commentary. You might see the future of announcing. So Nib said it best, support local boxing. Slip and Weave this week, I'm going to be having on my guy, Justin Big Time Biggs, host of the Bigs and Bigs podcast. One of the only active fighters that I know of that is also a media member. Had 2 crazy shoulder injuries just before the pandemic and had to take time off, but has fought, I believe, 7 times this year under trainer Joel Judah. So Justin Biggs is definitely a New York City fighter that's worth supporting. Check him out this week. I put out some new music recently. It's called 197th on any streaming platform that you listen to your music at. Please go support that. And that's what I got right now, fellas.
Sure, Nibs, we got any updates on Sounds About Right or anything you want to plug? Anything in here before we wrap things up, or?
Yes, sir. Of course, Jack was on with Sounds About Right a couple weeks ago. You can go watch his episode on YouTube. I've been slacking on my pimping with my editing, so I'm finally getting that together. The last week's episode will be put out tomorrow morning, and then we're going to be recording a live show on Sunday. So it'll be come fuck with us. We're actually going to be going live for the first time. We usually record our show and then put it out later, but we're going to try to see do a little not as catch and counter, but something like it. You know what I'm talking about. And, to add to that, to Dakota's story, the first local boxing show I ever went to, I went because there was a local boxer here from Tucson on the card. And guess who we ran into and hung out with all night? Brian Valoria, the Hawaiian Punch, bro. It was like his first title fight on the card. We didn't even know he was on there. Like you know what I mean? Hung out with the dude all night. He was fun as fuck. He bought us all drinks. But go support local boxing. Go support Sounds About Right. Go support Dakota and Jack.
Hell of a show.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I want to appreciate, shout out everybody in the chat, Weedy, Jeff, Felix, being everybody in there. Y'all really helped the show flow. So check out my guy Jeff. He's got Bourbon and Boxing. He's got his own show going on there. I like to tune in as much as I can with that too. So that is it for episode 22. We will catch y'all most likely next week. So maybe the boxing shop is back Monday. We shall see about that. That's definitely getting back.
So I think
There we go. So that'll be good. So they'll appreciate you guys tuning in for them. So we'll see y'all. Salute to everybody tuning in. That's it for episode 22, and we'll catch y'all next week.